Hey guys, what's going on? My name is VashTSB, and it's time we finally got down to the Artbook video. But first, we need to get a couple of disclaimers and a couple of actual admittances out of the way. So, first and foremost, the Artbook is incomplete. I will go into why I feel it is incomplete towards the end of the video, but it is pretty much an incomplete product. As such, that means that if there was anything in here that Capcom did not want us to see, we didn't get to see it. That meaning anything that could imply Dante going down into hell, Virgil being a character in the game from the start, a father-son connection between Virgil and Nero, we don't know. That's not in this book, that's still raw speculation, but what we do have still implies a lot of stuff from the early development into stuff that was just straight up cut content. What that is, I will point out as we go on. Also, you'll notice that the book is entirely written in Japanese. Now, I cannot speak or read Japanese fluently. Neither can Pokey, nor can Axie. As such, we have no real idea what any of the moon runes towards the bottom of the page actually mean. We could always take it over to somebody over at /V, but at the same time, I find it highly unlikely that anybody there actually speaks the language as well as some of them think they do. So, there you go. I would just as soon wait for an actual translated version of the book and just get it through there, rather than going to a third-party source outside of maybe a language professor at a university. So I'm just throwing that out there, just so we're all aware. Okay, let's get into it. So first and foremost, let's actually start with Nero, because a lot of the pages in the book deal with him very heavily. So first and foremost, some of these pages and art pieces actually just straight up imply certain story aspects for Nero. So what I'm talking about are things like this here. So perhaps Nero was supposed to, wear his cast for a lot longer, or he was supposed to work for the Order on a few missions, and maybe the arm transformation was supposed to be a thing that the player actually saw or played through. And also, as you can clearly see here, Nero could have looked very different than he actually did in the story. He could have worn a series of different alternate outfits, which could also imply that maybe the story was supposed to be a lot longer, at least chronologically, than it actually was. Also, his Devilbringer could have progressed physically, going back to that thing where we actually see the transformation, and it's not actually where it is in the actual game right from the get-go. Nero seems like he could have been meant to be much more devoted to the Order. And also, speaking towards the Order in general, some of the designs actually look very military in some of these drawings. Seeing references from a lot of European military, like the French military, with some of the coloration, and even some of the German World War II army with some of these designs, making Credo occasionally look like an SS member. So that's what Pokey and Axie pointed out to me. I didn't see it that way initially, but I can definitely see where they're coming from. So perhaps the Order was meant to be much more militaristic rather than Judeo-Christian religious. And I'm not entirely certain what is going on with this overall direction for Nero's design, but in a lot of art you see him wearing a scarf, and the scarf is swagging. It looks really good. I'd really like to actually play a version of this in-game, but what this could also be, as Mark pointed out to me, was that the scarf could have been meant for a visual engine demonstration of what MT Framework could do with physics. Seeing as how the scarf would actually be moving behind the character at all times, you could actually just use it as an engine demonstration that they just carry to a logical extent and then cut for the final product. Going back to Nero's Devilbringer, however, it seems like he was also, once again, meant to be hiding the Devilbringer for much longer. And also, going back to how it was supposed to progress physically, it kind of looks like Nero's growing an arm sheath as time goes on. I'm not really sure what that's all about. I'm assuming he was meant to be wielding the Yamato from a very early point in development. But what's also very interesting to me is how Nero seems to have switched hand dominance here. Because before, the sheath is growing on his right arm, which implies that if he were to be using the Yamato from there, it would be held in his left hand. Which he is left-handed in-game, although it seems to be a limitation that the Devilbringer is placed on him artificially. You see in-game that he actually wields the Yamato with his right arm. Also, at the same time, it's worth noting that in the perfect devil trigger for Nero that we see later on, the arm sheath is actually moved over to his left arm rather than his right. Now that we mostly have Nero out of the way, it also seems that Kyrie was supposed to have a much more expanded role in the story. Seeing here is that Kyrie could have potentially been intended to go along with Nero on screen, potentially for a couple of seasonal changes, or at least up to the actual castle town of Fortuna. Also, Kyrie looks like she could have been part of the Order here. This just clothing looks like it was designed for mobility rather than comfort, or any civilian clothing. She also looks like she could have been much more political. Moving on, there's also this strange-looking other female character who bears some minor resemblances to Kyrie, although, given the circumstances, she might have been a different character entirely. Perhaps used in a flashback sequence, she could very well just be Nero's mother. I have no idea. I don't know. I can't read what's going on. It's more than likely Kyrie. I don't think they just put that in there willy-nilly, but who knows? And now that we have Kyrie out of the way, we have to go on to Sanctus. Now, Sanctus could have looked very radically different in his final version of the story. Some influences drawn seem to have shifted regions. For instance, what you're seeing here looks to be influenced heavily by more Eastern religious influences, like maybe much more Buddhist. And we're also seeing here that Sanctus could have also aligned very severely with Sparta here, seeing as how one of his robes just has a flat-out perfect affinity for the color purple. However, this is the one page I really have no idea what the hell to think about. I don't know what's going on here. I'm assuming that is Sanctus there. If that is, I don't know what the fuck happened here. He could have actually been grafted with some sort of demonic armor, and as we see here behind him standing is Agnus, which means that he could have actually been experimented on by Agnus to make him this way. I don't know what's going on here. I honestly can only speculate. I can't read what's going on. I just know that maybe the whole story was meant to go down a much more dark path than it actually did. Moving on from that, we're actually going to take a look at some of the pages for Dante now. Now, the current Dante design seems to have been decided on from a very early point in development, and the overall design has remained largely consistent. Dante could have been designed for cold weather. I don't know what this means. There have been a couple of religious explanations thrown at me, implying that perhaps Dante was supposed to go down into the deepest circle of hell, which is apparently very cold. I don't know. That's just what Pokey told me. I don't know if that what this is. What I do know, however, is that from some of the earliest trailers of the game, it was supposed to be very cold weather, and this keeps with that motif. Also, we're also going back to the actual castle of Fortuna, which is very much so up in the mountains, so it's a very cold range, which means that maybe the game was supposed to have a costume change for that environment. I don't know. That's just what I noticed. Now we're going to be taking a look at some of Dante's weaponry. Now, no, whilst there are no new devil arms drawn here, what we actually see is a little bit confusing. So, taking a look here at the design for Lucifer, Lucifer looks like it could have become slightly detached from Dante, meaning that it could have actually been something that fought alongside you, or it maybe was just supposed to be more mobile or transformative than it actually was. And going on along with that, Lucifer's head shape looks very different between iterations, and if the head shape or the design down here is any indication, this very well could have been representative of an in-game boss. Just seeing as how all the devil arms take after their actual demonic counterparts, it's not too far-fetched to say that, well, if Lucifer were to be in-game, that would probably be what his, at least, skull or facial design actually wound up looking like. Keeping with the weapons, though, it seems to me like the actual weapon design was following a very strict theme, and we actually could have seen something similar to how Virgil used both Yamato and Force Edge at the same time in 3. What I'm noticing here is there are a lot of parallels in the design between Lucifer's art and Gilgamesh's art. Also in-game, they follow a very similar very striking visual design, which could imply that they were meant to be used at the same time, potentially through a customization menu, I don't know. You know, maybe Lucifer and Gilgamesh were meant to be used in tandem, or they were always supposed to be separate weapons, or maybe this could go back to that transformative thing where sometimes Gilgamesh was the actual form the weapon took, or sometimes Lucifer was the form the weapon took. Similar to how Pandora changes shape. And going on from that, someone actually pointed out that potentially Gilgamesh and Lucifer could have actually been separate forms of Pandora's box. I'm not really sure what that could actually mean. What I do know though is that it would actually keep up with it actually keeps up visually with the design of both Lucifer and Gilgamesh. So it could be that Lucifer and Gilgamesh were supposed to be different forms of Pandora. I don't know. That's just, again, pure speculation. It's just something that we noticed. Also, what I'm noticing here is that apparently there was supposed to be something going on with Dante's back, dependent on the actual type of weapon he used. It seems like for all the devil arms, there was a corresponding back ornament. What I mean when I say that is that there was something on Dante's back drawn here for Gilgamesh, and there was something on Dante's back for Lucifer. And strangely enough, when you actually look at it, when Dante takes off both his jacket and rebellion, there's an ornament there. There's something there that apparently signifies rebellion. What this means, I don't know. I'm not entirely certain. This could have been an in-game representation of the actual weapon you were using outside of, like, just... I don't know. It could have been something on the HUD. I'm not entirely certain. It's just something I'm pointing out. I don't know what this is all about. So yeah, moving on. Now we gotta go back to the devil triggers for both Dante and Nero. Now it looks to me like Dante's devil trigger was supposed to ascend and be affected by the weapon used. Like how in 1 and 3, the devil arms could potentially give Dante the power of flight, that being Alastor and Navon, respectively. Here, it looks like Lucifer was the weapon that could have given you the wings. And we also can see that the devil arm was supposed to affect how Dante actually looked. Seeing here as though these little limbs coming over Dante, separate from the wings, look very similar to the things that come over from Lucifer. So I'm not entirely certain. Also, this color scheme fits with the color scheme of both Burial and potentially for Lucifer, I'm assuming. So yeah, so apparently we were supposed to have a perfect or an ascended devil trigger, and it looks like in most of the designs, the perfect devil trigger was supposed to have wings and a tail. And another thing that I'm noticing here is that in all of these art designs, aside from the one where I see Lucifer's limbs, I don't see any devil arms. I see no weapons on Dante. What this could mean? It could be that the perfect devil trigger was meant to be used without weapons, and that the weapon, the devil arm, became part of Dante. So your fighting style would be very hand-to-hand, but it would be dependent on what devil arm you had equipped, which honestly sounds pretty fucking boss. And here we can actually see that Nero was supposed to... It looks like in sketches that Nero was supposed to ascend in Devil Trigger. He was supposed to get a full possession DT, just like Dante and just like Virgil and Daddy Sparta. So, I mean, yeah, we can just look here. We have two different poses of Nero, just posing in Devil Trigger. And it looks like it was actually something that the design team was running with for a decent amount of time, and I don't know when it was just kept at the Phantom. Oh, and keeping with the Phantom, is it me or does Super Dante look like it has a Phantom as well, similar to Nero? Now, this could just be an artistic representation of Super Dante, I'm not sure, but at the same time, this could also imply a 3-tier Devil Trigger system, wherein we have the lowest form of DT being the Phantom, which Nero has in the game, and then we have the mid-range, which is the full possession, which Dante has in-game, and then the perfect Devil Trigger, or the Ascended one, which is implied, again, in the art book. That's just something I noticed. It could just be a visual representation. They did it similarly in 3, so I don't know. Now, before we actually move on to the enemies and bosses, it's noting that Gloria and Trish's art seem to have radically different body types. Here we see that Gloria was always apparently supposed to be very voluptuous in terms and curvaceous in terms of body type, whereas Trish seems to be much more understated comparatively. Now, obviously, that didn't make it into the final game. We know that in terms of the Devil May Cry 4 official story that Gloria is Trish in disguise, but apparently it looks like the two could have been very different characters entirely. Like, Gloria was supposed to actually be somebody, so I don't know. I'm not certain. It's just something that I noticed and that Pokey pointed out, so yeah, there you go. And now we're going to be moving on to the bosses. So, Agnus, I'm assuming that this is Agnus here. I'm going to assume that he was supposed to have a much more insect-like design early on before they went for sort of the more angelic moth motif. So I don't really know what this is. This could be a different demon entirely. I'm just judging by the fact that he has a similar body type and is holding a gladius that this is actually Agnus. And here we see at this page we have a very alternate version of Echidna. And as Axie pointed out, this could potentially be a mate for Echidna. See, here what I'm noticing is that, and as Pokey pointed out, this could have been the initial design that was invariably turned into a female design. Seeing as how all of the bosses would have been male in the game, they wanted to vary it up in terms of gender. I don't know why, but this is what this is. This could also be just a different demon entirely that didn't make it into the game. This could have actually been Gilgamesh. I'm not certain, but what I do know is that whereas Echidna was much more of a plant-like, very floral reptile demon, this appears to be like a tree beast like insect, judging by the wings here. This design, I actually really love it. I would have loved to see this in game, but I mean, I don't know what actually changed. I don't know what happened, but just, yeah, it's what we noticed. Moving on. And also, I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is the Savior. The Savior seems to be very heavily themed with the concept of birth and infancy. I'm going to assume right here that this is the shot where we actually see the Savior ready to be born, and this is the Savior that actually goes through and terrorizes the castle town of Fortuna. What this actually could have looked like in game, I really have no idea. Obviously, this design differs heavily from the version of the Savior that we actually see in game that is very much so heavily inspired by a lot of artistic depictions of Sparta. So it's just something I noticed. It looks interesting. I really would have liked to see this represented in game, but hey, who knows? This could have been just a different entity entirely. We're making a lot of assumptions. I know. Moving on. And now we're going to be moving on to the enemies. Now, I'm just going to preface it with this. Something that Pokey pointed out to me is that towards the beginning of the design, everything looked to be very, very dark, very, very aggressive in terms of design, especially with the scarecrows as we're about to see here shortly. But as time and development moved forward, it seems like everything became a lot more, toned down and very PG is how he described it, and I honestly concur with that assertion. And yeah, just generally speaking, the enemies toned down visually, but still really interesting to look at in this art book. And generally speaking, everything that they included seems to have been implemented as they were designed, or at least as they were shown in the book. So first off, what I'm noticing right now is that this could mean one of two things. Enemies could have had multiple designs per type of demon, or this could just be like, hey, we're drawing a bunch of different interpretations, let's see which one is going to be the final one in game. I do know that there are multiple actual designs per type of scarecrow, arm, or leg. What I do know is that it would have been interesting to see these different types of assaults of Cutlass enemies actually making it into the game. Some of the different Mega Scarecrow designs look really interesting. Yeah, it's just something that I noticed. I can't corroborate if this was intended to be individual separate designs or if they were just trying to decide for which individual one was going to represent that entire species of demon. And right here on this page, it seems like we have a lot of separate designs for the Angelo enemies, and we could have had a separate species entirely. This one here looks vaguely feminine with very Valkyrie-esque details in some of the helmets, and this also implies that some of these could have just been straight up human enemies, instead of what I think actually happened in the real story was that some of the souls of some of the townspeople were actually taken out of their bodies, and I think that's what was used in the Angelo armor. I'm not certain, but I think that's what happened. And here we see some of the scarecrows could have had multiple weapon types with multiple movesets per weapon used. It could have been interesting, and I would have actually liked to see this used in game. And continuing on with that initially very dark, very, gothic design, here we see that the scarecrows were actually things, like entities, like living creatures inside of these little burlap sacks, rather than just, I think it was demon energy or like insects that inhabited them. So they probably would have actually bled when you hit them. But what Pokey pointed out was that these could have actually been tortured souls from hell that were dismembered and just sort of reconstructed and just thrown and sent after whatever hell wanted to target. So that was an interesting interpretation of what was going on. I sort of concur with it, but yeah, this is pretty serious design, and I sort of wish they would have kept with this, because some of this looks really good, and it would have been really interesting to see, a bit more of a dark horror-esque approach taken for some of the earlier stages as the town is getting overrun. And now for the last 2 pages we're going to be looking at out of the art book. How do I approach this one? Okay, so first off, let's just go by what we can actually read. So Unappearance Devil could mean 2 very different things. Unappearance Devil could mean that this is just a poorly translated version of, hey, this is a demon type that did not appear in the final game. However, this could also mean that this was supposed to be a type of demon in hell that could move, that could potentially be invisible, that was supposed to take things from the player. I'm not certain. And seeing the 3 separate designs for these demons here, this could have been a boss fight with 3 enemies, similar to Agni and Rudra, or the largest demon here seems to be eating what I'm going to assume to be crystallized demon blood, so the red orbs. This could have been a merchant. This could have been a shopkeeper type demon for Dante, similar to the merchant in Resident Evil 4. I'm not certain. So much speculation. I have no idea what the hell is going on with this page. I just know that the art is very, very interesting to look at, so I'm not entirely certain. Who knows? And then we move on to this page, which, yeah. Okay. I really have no idea what on earth I'm looking at. But these demons look like the enemies for hell. We have the Centipede Demon, which was supposed to be apparently a multi-stage boss battle, very reminiscent to the one that we fought in Devil May Cry 3, but just all of this stark coloration seems to indicate very cold weather, which goes back to that thing that Pokey brought up earlier, or I guess I quoted Pokey on, that maybe Dante was actually supposed to go down into the deepest circle of hell where it's apparently very cold. So, I don't know, but what I do know is that some of these designs look very interesting. Some of them look very fleshed out, others not so much. But just generally speaking, a lot of this looks really, really interesting. And this satyr demon-like thing here looks like sort of the male version of Echidna. If it was bipedal, I'm just really seeing that in the facial structure. I don't know. I really have no idea what the hell this could be. And also, I noticed this was last 2 pages. I lied. Right here, we're seeing the Gladius enemy, and this little cute chibi Dante thing implies to me that maybe this was supposed to either be some ideas for a cinematic introduction of the Gladius enemy, or this says that to me that the Gladius was potentially an enemy designed to be fought by Dante rather than Nero. So I'm really not certain what on earth is going on here. This book is filled with tons of stuff that implies a lot. The art in it's really great. I'm going to do my best to put a link in the description to the actual scans that I used for this video. So you can go and look at that. You can draw your own inferences. You can let me know in the comments section what you think certain things are, what they could have been. Yeah, so that's the art book video. I know this one is very long, but yeah, there was a lot to go over here, and I hope that when special edition comes out, we get a more complete version of this. Now, when I said that this was an incomplete product, what do I mean? Well, you'll notice something. there was no actual art in the book for some of the other enemies that are in the game. Like, there's no art for the female version of Echidna. There's no art for Bale or Dagon or the Feelers. There's no art for that. So, and we also only have vague concept sketches and actual in-game renderings for some of the weapons. So we know that there is a lot of art that was not put into this book. So we're drawing a lot of inferences off of incomplete information in another language. So yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. My name has been VashTSB, and I'll see you guys soon.